How's it going, everyone? Today we're gonna build is now this Trello clone in React using Next as a way to now put a test all the things that we have learned so far, and especially is thinking in React, okay? As a way to build now this UI and how you can compose that. So based on the React dev here, from the thinking in React, it is important to, anytime you're gonna build something, a UI, you need to have or the data or the mockup. If you have both, that'll be great, right? So in this particular case, we only have the mockup, and one of the things that they mentioned that is that once you already have that mockup or the data, if you have both, great, all right? Now you can break the UI into components hierarchy. How you can start with this? Well, one of the recommendations is that if you have a JSON well structure, it is often find it naturally map the component structure of your UI. However, if now you have is the mockup, the design, all right, it is when it comes to break down these components, as I mentioned here, now that you identify the component in the mockup, arrange them into a hierarchy. So you either or get the structure programmatically using the single responsibility principle or the CSS or from the design. So the UI designer already have that thing. So the TLDR of this is, in our particular case, we are going to use is the mockup. So question is, how can we now start to build from what we have, right? So one of the things they mentioned is that I think is this. Exactly. One of the things they mentioned is that break down your components into hierarchy. Okay, break the UI into a components hierarchy. In this case, you can start from, if this is a simple application, you can start from top to bottom. All right, but if you have now is projects or large code bases, it is better to start from bottom up. Okay, so the analogy here is that if you want to start from the scratch, you start usually from top to bottom. You're starting to create that. However, if you want to, in the case of a surgeon, when he go out and say, all right, now it is time to, for example, do an open heart surgery, okay, or something that is not that complicated. Well, it is often to actually is and start from bottom up. But in any case, in our particular case, the approach we're gonna take is from top to bottom. First, we identify is the components hierarchy. It can be programmatically by saying, hey, these components will follow is a single responsibility, or it can be provided by the designers or from the data. But in any case, so here we already create is our React or particularly our Next.js component. Next.js. Let's say Trello clone with Next.js. My bad. And it is time for us to actually build that up and get yourself familiar when it comes to actually build this small applications as it is. So right now is now loading. No, I mean it's good. That handsome bastard is here. All right. But right now we are just downloading all of these assets. Okay. So by downloading all of these assets here, and actually it's taking quite amount of time. I don't know why. We actually is connected to that network. Installing dependencies, installing def dependencies. Okay. Some of them are deprecated. And there you get it. So now let's go into actually is get into the Trello clone. All right, open up here with code. That's right. Open up here with code. In fact, let me actually change the target here of the I think it's this one. All right. And now, as you can see the structure here, because now Next has an old way of doing things and now the new way of doing things, which is using is the app router. So any file-based routing. The TLDR is file-based routing. So you define is your folders and your page inside of your folder, followed by this notation, page.tsx. So let's go to now run this in development. All right. So we will have is now this application, right? The default application from Next. So what we're gonna do here is to get rid of this. Okay, we don't actually want to have that. Get rid of this content here. Okay. Yeah, get rid of all of this content here. We don't need them. Okay, that's right. And now we're going to start building top to bottom this small application. So how you can start with? Well, because this data that we are getting from this data that we're getting from okay, the Go sandbox here. There you got it, which is this one. All right. We want to get is this data here, this do me data, and be able now to add it in our project. Let's gonna say here is some folder here called data, right? Some data here, and inside of this data we're gonna is add the data.json followed by this, right? So here we got it. Good, we already have that data, and one of the great things of this is that because we already have that data, let's imagine that we don't have that data right now. And in fact, just only follow is this, all right? So how are you going to organize that? So we now have is that this is a component called column, and that column contains is the title, and inside of that has another component called the car, that contains the title of the car, followed by the title and the assignee, and that kind of thing. And the idea here is to start building, now that you identify your components hierarchy, to actually is to actually is how do you put it? Yeah, to actually is build a static version of this. And that's exact because now it is the second step. Build a static version in React. Do not involve anything related to state or anything of that. So the most straightforward approach is to build a version that renders the UI from your data model without adding any interactivity yet. Okay, so at the end of the day, most you will need is how this gonna look like, and then you're going to build that particular thing. So because of that, okay, the most straightforward approach is to build a version that renders the UI from your data model without adding the interactivity. Yet it's often easier to build a static version first and add interactivity later. Build a static version requires a lot of typing and no thinking, but adding interactivity requires less typing and not and yeah, less typing, but a lot thinking. So to build a static version of your app that render your data model, you will want to build components that reuse other components and pass data using props. Props are a way of passing data from parent to child. If you're familiar with the concept of state, you don't use state at all to build this static version. State is reserved only for interactivity. That is, data that change. Exactly. State is reserved only for interactivity. Data that change over time. Since this is a static version of the app, you don't need it. You can either build top down by starting with building the components higher in the hierarchy, or bottom up by working with component lower. But again, this is not when it comes to actually build this static version. How are you gonna do that? Top to bottom, if you have a small app for simple example, which is in our case, or bottom up for large projects. So that's exactly what we're gonna do right now. Okay, so from top to bottom, we're gonna build this. We already identified the components. Let's also call now here is the component. Okay, and inside of that, then you're gonna say, all right, this will be is the column dot .gsx, followed by the car dot .gsx. Okay, and because this requires a lot of typing, we're gonna start from the column by exporting this component and say, hey, this will be called column. All right, where now this column here is just render this GSX element, which is just the title. Okay, we must render is a title here. One of the beautiful thing of this is that because we're using is now Tailwind for that, we can now, instead of actually defining our own styles, we can come up with this specific and most common CSS style. So for example, we can say, hey, I want you to add now the padding of 4 to this, to the title, right? So this will be is the name of the title, all right? This particular title. And also I want you to now is show I want you to is wrap this title into another div element, another division, like this, all right? Where here I'm going to say is, hey, now this elements, which is part of the column per se, I just want is to, well, all of the elements that you're gonna send, that you're gonna do that, I just want to render into a grid, all right? Which means is that stack next to each other. And then I want you to now is, after the title, that you add is a background of, let's say, background grade, something like this. Okay, then right below that, I want you to now add is this component called card, but we haven't created that card yet. Okay. So what we can do? Well, we can is create that components called card. Okay. Build that and return this static version of GSX, which is in this case, the card is made of the title, also the title here and the assignee. Okay. The ticket one. Okay. So it's like the idea of this. So ticket, say ticket ID. Okay, so ticket one. This is now the structure of this. All right. Now the ticket of this. So this will represent is now class name will represent is our car. Okay, where now this car I want you to is add some padding to the X position. Let's say a padding of 2 for that. All right, and then right below I want you to now do this. I want you to center this element using the text center, because at the end of the day this element is taking now all the available space. This is known as this inline display type. So for example, H1 and div is actually now set the height from this. You can text the center of this element here, and also you wanted to show is now the title here. Let's say using a paragraph by saying is now the title. Let's say title here, and the name of the title. Okay, so task 1, the name of the title here, and followed by the assignee. Right, this is the assignee. So this is the data that we need to render here. Inside of this, we're gonna define some props. Okay, call is the issue, because we are building is now the this Trello clone that is going to now is render the issue data, issue.id. Okay, which of course must contain is ID, issue.id. Okay, followed by the title, which is issue.title. All right, and that's when TypeScript becomes quite handy here, because it says like, how do you know the type of this? You know, because we're already actually looking at the data that we already have. But if you don't have that, it's like, how do you know that this is the proper data? You know what I mean? But in any case, so this is now our car, okay? And this is the data that we expect to pass down here. So as we now going to actually is notify to React that, hey, this is the component that we want to export by default car. Now I want you to make use of this component here as a way to show then with the proper data. What is the proper data? Glad you asked. Issue, which must have is a object, okay, that initially is only gonna have is yeah, for the sake of this demo, it only gonna have is this will be the issue. Okay, that'll be the shape of this. Right, this is just mock data. All right, just mocking data here. So now this is the issue that we're going to pass down there. and using is the dash is a way to close components. And then I want you to export this component, again, default column, to be used now on the main endpoint or the root elements. In this case, here using the React, using the next approach to render this kind of component, okay? And finally, let's going to actually render the column here. Are we not exporting that? Yep, we are exporting that. And now render that column here, column. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Say column, but why this doesn't work? So column. That's quite interesting. Export default column. Anyway. Okay. Component. Using the column for that, and you say column. Okay, and this is the component that I want to make use here as it is. But not like this, column. All right, so because now the only thing that we care about is to say, hey, we throw an error. Is I can resolve the components column car. It's not column column. All right. So now here we're supposed to be able to see is this particular title. So we can fix is now a little bit the layout here. For example, to show now the title in the middle by saying is that, hey, because after all this is an H1 element, okay? I want you to now center this element. Say, hey, this is now text center. All right. Now it's centered up properly. And now the design is starting to look somewhat similar. All right. Somewhat similar. Now it is time for us. It's not actually render that data. Oh, it's because it's key. Is key here. Exactly, like so. Now that we have already built this static version, let's actually now build the other column as well, which is by using now this division. For example, here as a way to now create more complex layout, that is using the class name using grid, okay? And then you say, let's go to now grid template columns for elements, right? So column span or column call for, which is called span for. No, it's not called span. Is that template or grid? Exactly, grid column, grid calls for, as a way to repeat now these particular columns 4 times. Okay, so we are building is now this static version here, 2, 3, and 4. All right, and that's exactly what it's going to show. But now, glad you do that, because I want you to now is show these elements and add some gap between them. Let's get into it. So now, luckily for us, grid provides this particular property in the CSS to add gap to this. Not only for grid, but also for flex items. So we can say, hey, let's go to add a gap of 12. right? And now things started to somewhat similar behave like that. You can add a more bigger gap as you need to, okay? Or you can even add gap based on the mhm. Or you can even add gap, for example, like this. So now all of these elements actually show as expected. All right. And now it's time to import our data. So let's go to import our data here. For example, like this. And we say, hey, from the endpoints, I want to take a look from the root elements. I want you to now take a look at the data and the data.json. Get me that data here. And when you're going to render this component, I want you to make this variable that I'm going to define reactive. Because after all, any variables, props, and state you define in the rendering logic it becomes reactive. Why is that? Because its value is going to be changed at some point. Most frequently with states and props, and sometimes with this value. That's why they define in React. They say now this is reactive value. So far so good, because what happened is now we can define is using the structure syntax from the data. You can say is now this will be is the column for that. Okay. And this is now the data that I want you to actually is iterate through that. So in other words, what we're going to do here is by iterate through this, we say, hey, let's going to use this now the GSX. Allow me to use JavaScript here on the template using column.map as a way to now get the data from the column, all right, followed by the index. And anytime you need to interact with this or any during rendering time, I want you to now is compute this or render this, right? Oh, yeah, this is more like, and because after all, every component needs a key when you're going to render elements. Well, usually you should use the ID that come from the database, but this actually works as expected. This is now more like a TypeScript error here when they say, hey, you know what? You are actually rendering and that kind of thing, you know? So we expect now to actually is this one. And what the F is this? It's actually not even rendering this component. That's weird. Oh, it's because what it expects to pass is this data. So let's go to actually define out the props here columns. What we're going to pass is the column here. All right, as a way to now render these elements this 4 times. But for some reason, it's now but for some reason now it say, hey, columns exactly, which I am destructuring from that column, which is an array. The expected types come from property children, which is declarative type here. Type void is not assignable to type React node. We are importing this data here, and now it's saying, hey, type void is not assignable to type React. The iterable React node, the type returned by symbol.iterator.next are incompatible between the types. The iterator result yield and yield result remember that at the end of the day, I just want us to return here is in this component. Okay, curly braces. Jesus. So we're not going to send any data that right down. I just want us to actually show this data as it is. That's right. Okay, the problem was because we were exporting is something different. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to pass down this data as a way to now render these elements here. And since we are receiving here is the column, or let's say here as the issue, okay, for that, no, let's gonna call this the column data, all right, and here's when we're going to now render that column.title. If I do column.name, okay, column.name, and I want you to now pass down data there, like so. So when I save this, now I should be able to see is this to do, in progress, in review, and that kind of thing. And now things are starting to actually look as expected. You can also add some, for example, text font. Let's say text font. How do you put it? Text 2XL, like that, as a way to now show them much more aligned to this. You can put this like so. I'm gonna make this like this to actually look like that as the design. All right. So this is the background. see like some sort of red, that kind of thing. Some sort of neutral. Yeah, some sort of this, like neutral, as you can see here. And now it is time for us to adding is, but as you can see, it's actually showing this data properly. We can hit inside of our column design something like this. Say, hey, you know what? I want you the border width, border color, or exactly, I want to say is that border slate. All right, it's not going to show something because I need to indicate what is the width of that border width. Current transparent black, border solid. Okay, and I need to define is the border width, the border, yeah, the border width. You know, things are starting to actually look like the design here. All right, so far so good. Yep, actually so far so good here. And now it is time for us is to render this component, the car component here. So as we mentioned here, we're going to now render this data that come from the columns, because now we're going to render several of these cards. Okay, we can say again using the GSX curly braces, I want you to now from the column dot issues property, I want you to iterate through each one of those elements and then pass down that data to the car and print this. Okay, pretty much is this. Always you need to pass is the key for that, as the let's gonna use is the issue that key, I think it is. All right, again, all of these data must come from the database. You, as a way to keep track of these all of these elements. And as you can see here, this is how now things started to look like. All right. Yep. This is now how things started to look like. Like so. We can add this to a div. All right. But now this is how things is going to look like. As a way to now prevent that take all the available space, which is something that is happening here. Okay, if you don't have any elements, it's like, well, you're not going to show anything. We can just do something like this. It's like, hey, if the column dot issue dot length is equal to 0, all right, then I want you to now print is this element, say, hey, show, I want you to now render this piece of element with no elements here, empty element, say empty, say, or no elements, right? It throw, of course, a runtime error because it say, hey, is issues in plural, and now that you got this. So because at the end of the day here we are using is now a grid, okay, and we are not indicating how much space this must take. We can say is, hey, this will be the height, fit, and all of these elements there will contain that height. I want you to now set the height to that element position, fit that. Well, you can add some more elements here. So like class name here, and you say, hey, class name text center. All right, you say no elements like this. All right, things are starting to look like as the model right now. And then now it's time to actually show this car as like the design here, like the design here, separate by this and so on and so forth. So each one of those cars here must have is a background white, okay, as a way to be able to identify each one of them. All right, and also I want now is to add per car something like this. You might wonder, why do you want to add this as a wrapper of that car, as a way to now be able to manipulate is the layout. We change the key as a way to, instead of the component, keep track of this div tag. Class name will now become is the particular class there, by saying is I want you to now show a margin bottom of 4 elements, and now your component is starting to look like the design. So your component is starting to look like the design. And I think this is quite interesting. Building this is very, very interesting. You can also add to each one of them, each one of those, but inside of the car here, you can say, hey, I want you to now add some border. Okay, you say border bottom. All right, bottom, and I mean is border. Say border border 2, but I just want to add that border is to a specific locations. For example, border X 2, exactly, only on the, okay, on top and bottom. No, I want, okay, it's G, top and bottom, like that. I want to also add the border color here. Yeah, add a border color of slate, right? And that'll be all. So now it's going to look like very similar to the design, and here, right after that, we can say something like this, like, all right, I want you to now add a bold here. You can say, hey, well, let's make this bold, or font bold, here. So the design is starting to look like the same for that. So this is quite interesting because now this will give us is the ability of how you can now create a mock on this, and also to define is the bottom, which is hey, I want you to define is a div here, followed by a bottom here, where this will only have is this thing here, okay, this element like that. And I want you to show that on the right, using text.write, you'll actually be able to show that. It say, hey, I cannot render this because this is not a valid character that you want to. And not sure how you transform that. Oh, use this now, the escape character. Interesting. So escape character GT. All right. And now you get, oh my God. Use this escape character here, like so. All right, in this bottom, you can add some padding to this button using class name, padding of 2, and the background, like, no, that's here, and then you got it, right? Well, actually, it's not that big. You can say something like this, or no padding at all. Or you can say its padding is on the X position, right? Something like this. And then add some margin bottom of 2. So now the design is starting to look exactly like the other, and as you can see, we are now know how to build this kind of thing, and this is blazing fast, bro. Blazing fast. It's like blazing fast. And again, we only build is this UI, okay, like so. You know, we build only this UI like so, just like that, right? So far so good, and I'm going to leave like as it is, and that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.